Alaska. He would have been considered a rash prophet who 5 years ago predicted it would one day become a great and powerful state. So wrote an authority in the National Geographic magazine in 1902, a time when fields of gold were thought to be in endless supply. Today, the gold has all but gone, yet man persists in channeling the vast wealth contained in the earth and sea to his purposes. Caught up by the frontier spirit and equipped with new technology, he continues to challenge the harsh, stubborn forces of nature and appears to be winning. Is he now, as in the past, simply exploiting and plundering, only to leave when he is done? Or will he stay to make the prophecy of greatness for this awesome, majestic land a reality at last? What is the state of Alaska? Anchorage is Alaska's boomtown. 121,000 people, nearly half the state's population, live in this area, and it's still growing. Remote from the South 48 states, its people are perhaps more spiritedly American than anywhere else in the nation. So they must be, to carve out a modern society in this inhospitable country. Partly by choice, partly by necessity, they live off their land. King crab, moose, and caribou, countless kinds of fresh salmon and trout are frequent substitutes for beef and pork.
Hey, come and get it. Let's go, folks. Come on, Annie. Come on.
Must have kind of.
Before coming to this distant land, profound decisions had to be made. Friendships would be ended, family ties severed, and in some cases, established careers abandoned. Why have they come? Why have they stayed? Their answers illuminate the story of Alaska today.
Bill, I think an Alaskan is a person who wants a challenge and comes up here and faces life the way he'd like to see it and tries to succeed. This has been the case with me, at least I think it has. 7 years ago, we were in Portland, Oregon, and we just got fed up with society, that's all, and civilization. There were just too many pressures on a person. We can jump in a bush plane, and in 5 minutes, we're over virgin country. We can go hunting and fishing. In 20 minutes, we can be out over a great salmon stream. In an hour, we can be out in country that probably nobody's ever seen before.
I don't hate Alaska at all. I admire Alaska very much, but I think Alaska is a state of personality rather than mind. And I don't have the personality for Alaska. And I think the people who are successful and happy here are those who like the challenges and accept them and go to the next highest mountain.
The marvelous thing up here is that people like you for what you are, not from the class you come from or for the way you dress or how elegant or if you know how to keep your little finger when you hold a cup of tea or that kind of thing.
I think that up here, too, when you look at, when we first came up here, people said, oh, it's lucky you don't have children. You know, how could you take children to a wilderness, you know, like Alaska? Well, at the time, you know, you're probably right, because even though I'd read every book in the library on Alaska, I still wasn't prepared, you know. I still hadn't quite got the igloos and the, you know, out of my head, right. And so we got here, and this is the greatest place to raise children.
I think the best way to find out whether you like Alaska or not is to go outside. I think Tex and I both go outside or drag our families outside once a year. When you get down that rat race in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Chicago or New York.
Washington, D.C.
Washington, the worst place is Washington, D.C. And you get that traffic and you get the people and you get the short answers and you get the lack of friendship and you say, let's go back to Alaska.
Alaska is primitive, it is beautiful, and it is big, almost beyond comprehension. In size, 1/5 that of the entire lower 48 states. But for all its expanse, its population is still the smallest of the 50 states. To bring people and prosperity to Alaska, reliable, inexpensive transportation must yet be developed. The recent inaugural of a ferry system of 3 giant ships marks an important step forward. Formerly isolated from each other, the 7 towns along the rugged, broken southeast coastline have now begun to engage in constant, productive exchange. Bill Garrett, a National Geographic editor and photographer, has been covering the new state and its people for several years. Accompanying him on this summer's journey are his wife Lucy, their sons, Mike 14, Kenny 13, and the boy's 4-year-old St. Bernard, Brandy. The Malaspina is full to capacity, as she and her sister ships will be all season. At Ketchikan, first northbound port of call, some of the 500 passengers go ashore to sightsee, to camp, fish, and hunt, to work, or having visited on the outside, to return home. Forewarned of the largest tourist influx in history, the Garretts have anticipated the shortage of hotel space. They will travel wherever roads exist in this motorhome. While they intend to camp out often, these mobile living quarters also provide insurance against southern Alaska's notorious rainfall. Bill's itinerary is flexible. During the next few months, he and the family will meet Alaskans, see and experience the essential Alaska. The ferry system provides an excellent beginning. It not only eliminates 1,000 miles of strenuous driving on the Alaska Highway, but has revealed the previously bypassed coastal reaches of the Inside Passage. At Haines, the traveler must finally take the wheel for approximately 700 miles of dusty, rough road to Fairbanks or Anchorage. From Anchorage, another ferry route ties together and makes easily accessible a number of southwestern towns. But one cannot expect to traverse Alaska on land and water alone. For good reason is it called the flyingest state.
I'm always amazed at the Alaskans' casual attitude toward flying. Up here, the airplane is as common as a taxi cab, and distance isn't measured in miles, but hours of flying time. Whether for business or pleasure, the plane is an absolute necessity. Of all the various aircraft used, it's still the versatile single-engine plane, and that breed of colorful, dauntless men, the bush pilots, which keep the country going. We met Pete Sesson as a bush pilot with a service to sell, but came to cherish him as a friend. He's as open as the country he served for 20 years, flying families, food, mail, and spare parts to remote fishing and logging communities, handling every kind of emergency as well, some at great risk to his own safety. He and a handful of fellow pilots are the lifelines of this spectacular frontier. Minutes after landing for an overnight outing, we get a sampling of Ketchikan's 150-inch annual rainfall. We can't complain, though. A free cabin, boat, and an entire lake to ourselves. The imaginative Forest Service has made scores of such wilderness retreats available to the public. Now, as for the fishing, cutthroat trout, dolly vardens, gigantic silver salmon, it's an angler's paradise of the first magnitude. With the skies cleared, Pete resumes his dawn to dusk flights. And during the Alaskan summer, that means a long work day.
I used to come up here, I'd like to hunt. I'd usually go on a hunting trip once a year. And in the last 12 years, I haven't shot anything alive with a gun. I'd rather see it in its natural habitat. Flying up here and being around here so much in this backcountry, you get to appreciate it. You get to appreciate human nature more. Usually out in this country, you'll run into a lot of self-sufficient people. I mean, they're self-sufficient. They have to be. I think that's what I like about this country.
Foxtrot, catch a can. 3-5 Foxtrot, catch a can.
3-5, catch a can, go ahead.
Roger, Pete, we have an emergency out at Thorn Bay.
I will be a stretcher case, over.
3-5, catch a can. Do they have a stretcher available?
They do have a small stretcher available.
Roger, Roger, on my way.
In emergencies, the bush pilot asks few questions. He just goes. Pete's intimate knowledge of 80,000 square miles of this untamed land has proved indispensable many times. To some 160 expectant mothers, he got them all to the hospital on time, as well as to 70 search and rescue missions for lost aircraft. Alaskans need each other. Pete knows the next search could be for him.
I don't particularly want to make a lot of money up here. I know I won't, because I'm not dedicated enough to making money that way. I don't care about that. But I feel I've been doing some good for this area, and it's only right, since this country has been so good to me.
There are nearly 6 million acres of spruce and hemlock in the south coastal region alone. Within a few years, the logging industry has grown to become second only to fishing in the state's economy. Most of the timber will be pulverized and serve as the base for synthetic fibers, much of it for export to Japan, Alaska's prime potential market. A spar tree is the focal point of the complex operation required to pull the felled trees down from the mountainous slopes. Throughout its history, Alaska's natural wealth has brought men here. For fur, for fish, for gold they came, took what they wanted, and left the land barren. Only recently has conservation become an important concern for government and industry alike. And closely supervised advanced reforestation programs ensure both controlled cutting now and new, healthier forests in the future.
Barney Huddleston is foreman and leading tree topper at the Thorn Bay logging camp, largest in Alaska. For the past 5 years, this isolated community of 500 has been home for him and his family. Like Pete Sessman, the danger he's exposed to daily is routine to his profession. And though both were initially drawn to this outpost of civilization by the good money, after coming to know them, you realize that they've stayed on for other reasons.
Many Alaskans doubted the wisdom of a marine highway system. To their surprise, it was an immediate and overwhelming success. This year, more than 100,000 passengers made the breathtaking 30-hour voyage, and already plans are underway for additional vessels to accommodate its phenomenal popularity. Alaska's capital, Juneau, with a population of 10,000, is reached only by sea or air. It boasts the most moderate climate in the state, in the 60s during the summer, the 30s in the winter. Another source of pride is its 9-hole, $1 million golf course. The grass-free fairways are literally a priceless sight, but with every step and stroke, the player touches gold. Tailings from the old Juneau gold mine dating back to 1880. That was the year of Joe Juneau's discovery, the first major strike in Alaska. Suddenly, this far unknown country, relegated to oblivion by the public and government, demanded respect. Restless adventurers and prospectors, already finding the Wild West too civilized, came first. Then, 17 years later, the world rushed in. For gold, tons of it, had been uncovered in the Klondike. Farmers and doctors, barbers, bankers, and housewives. More than 100,000 people left their homes in quest of quick fortunes in the Yukon. Gold in the millions was to be had, but only a chosen few would ever find it. Fewer keep it. It was a time for legends, and each of the nearly 40,000 souls who finally reached the Klondike's capital, Dawson, could rightfully claim his own, for the journey itself was a challenge of monumental proportions. Weather and geography as formidable as any place on Earth denied entry to all but the most hardy and determined. The major routes through Alaska began in Skagway and Dyea, 600 tortuous miles away. Like Dawson, Skagway became an overnight boomtown, swelling to 15,000 at its peak in '98. During that year, the lawless rule by Soapy Smith and his gang of con men, thieves, and swindlers forced one seasoned traveler to conclude it was about the roughest place in the world, little better than a hell on earth. Soapy's brief, colorful career was ended by a bullet, and the town transformed itself into a law-abiding, church-going community. It prospered for 3 more years. Crowds no longer stream down Broadway, yet remarkably Skagway survived. Cherishing their past, the 750 inhabitants take watches during freezing winter storms to safeguard the lifeless, haunted buildings against fire. Skagway has no substantial year-round industry, but now it is the last stop on the ferry route, and tourism provides a saving grace from complete economic disaster. Within 3 hectic months, its citizens must earn their annual living, usually from a wide variety of jobs.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. How's everything going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Are we moving our way through again, but we take the trail?
Brother, here you got a dog this time.
You take dogs here, too?
Sure.
Bill Farrell can't afford to relax during these valuable summer days. Besides greeting all the ships that enter the port and running a hotel, he serves as a local travel agent, airline representative, official weatherman, and also manages the local TV station.
During 1898, my grandfather froze to death up at White Pass City. My grandmother with 4 young ones to raise. And we've been in Alaska ever since. When I graduated from high school, I started working for the railroad. And then we had a war. When I came back from the war, I kept thinking that the town had a future. At the time, it was just existing. As a matter of fact, that's just about what it's doing now, is existing. I still feel that there is a future here. A lot of tourists will ask you, what do you do here in the winter? That's when people who live in Skagway get to know each other. Summertime, we're too busy. Wintertime is our playtime. To get TV into Skagway, it's been a dream of mine for a good many years. We probably have the smallest station in the world right here. It's costly, but it's still nice to see what's going on in the rest of the world. It gives me something to talk about the next day.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, step right up. Place your bets, please.
I personally regard Skagway as the most flagrantly unself-conscious, charming tourist town I've ever seen. This Days of '98 show is totally without commercial overtones. The performers are unpaid and seem to enjoy themselves as much as the visitors. Whenever a ship docks, sometimes 5 or 6 nights a week, they wear their handed-down costumes of the Elks Lodge and relive their storied past. "70 years ago, the gambling was for real, and hard liquor, not soda, was served. But as raucous and gaudy as Skagway was, a stable, yet still colorful town managed to take root. These descendants of the Klondikers are refreshingly vital people, and in their amateur but inspired way successfully evoke the past. You'd think they'd tire doing this show so often, but they don't. At least most of them.
When the Chichacos, as the Indians called the excited, wild-eyed strangers in their midst, set out for the Klondike, they had little idea of what dangers and agony lay directly before them. 2 state foresters and a local wrangler joined the Garretts to ride, walk, and climb the infamous Chilkoot Trail. Infamous because it would take many a gold-crazed tenderfoot 3 months to conquer these first 35 miles to the Yukon. It was wintertime then. Blizzards and a ton or more of supplies slowed movement to a snail's pace. There was death along the Chilkoot, suicides, murders, and pneumonia. One gigantic avalanche of ice and snow took more than 60 lives, yet few turned back. The horses have been returned to Skagway. Only pack mules could master the terrain from here on. By now, the weary Klondikers had discarded all luxuries. Trunks of jewelry and fancy clothes spotted the landscape. Before reaching the Chilkoot Pass, many a greenhorn had also surrendered his bankroll to Soapy Smith's cleverly disguised con men. One merchant, however, got 10,000 bottles of precious mosquito oil safely to the Yukon. Beasts of burden could not go beyond the scales. Here, all supplies were weighed before the final ascent of the Chilkoot Pass itself. For those who could afford Indian packers to carry their goods, the rate was $1 a pound. This, then, was the Argonaut's first major test of strength, endurance, and patience. 3,500 feet to the summit and the Canadian border. 40 trips back and forth to the scales to get all supplies up. No one permitted across with less than 1,100 pounds of food. Lose your place in the creeping line, and you lose a day, perhaps more if a storm strikes. 22,000 men, women, and children climbed this pass in the winter of '98. A romantic yearning for wealth had brought them from Greece and Japan, Australia and Scotland, Florida and Texas. On the inhuman Chilkoot, the gold became a burning obsession. 550 miles of wilderness still lay ahead. The gold seeker had to decide, should he go on? Dog teams would now take him to a lake where boats could be built for the trip down the Yukon. But some men, their heavy loads of boat kit safely on the top, had had enough of this defiant country and returned to civilization. Preferring heartbreak to insanity, they left behind 70 years ago these warped symbols of their dreams. It has taken the Garrett party 4 hard, wet days and nights to retrace the Chilkoot's 35-mile route. Now they also are anxious to see city lights again. Two years after the first stampede, the first leg of a narrow-gauge railway was opened between Skagway and Bennett Lake in the Yukon. This incredible engineering feat signaled the doom of the treacherous Chilkoot.
For 4 days, we walked over the bones of a gold rush. Dreams of wealth alone couldn't explain the mass hysteria. I'm sure it was also the glamour of the rush and the urge to be a part of this adventurous country which compelled thousands to take the torturous trip to the Klondike. And those who made it all the way only to find the gold already staked couldn't consider themselves failures, for they'd written a unique chapter in the history of human courage and imagination. Before time erodes all traces of this romance, I think Americans, especially Alaskans, must see that this trail, so rich with lore, is preserved for the pleasure and inspiration of future generations. We relived a part of its incredible story and won't ever forget it.
Alaska will continue in 1 minute.
The Alaskan brown bear, largest carnivorous mammal on land, is the hunter's most prized trophy. While the sport is important to the state's economy, strict controls may assure the bear's continued number. Bill has joined Joe Blum, Alaskan wildlife management expert, on a field trip to a remote preserve 50 miles from Juneau. With the salmon running strong, the giant, usually dangerous animals seem too preoccupied to care about the presence of strangers.
Weight, you would figure him around 600 pounds.
Fully furred out in the fall, he probably would be. He has a pink salmon, which is not spawned yet. It's just moving up. Probably came in on this afternoon's tide. Clamps down on it with his front feet and more or less strips his flesh and hiding the meat off of the fish. This is probably a 4-year-old female. She's probably just been bred this year. Will have cubs in January. As you notice, she saw fish when she was still on the bank and took a couple bounds and grabbed for them and missed, and then looked around as if she couldn't see where they were. They'll do this many times and maybe get a fish only 25% of the time. When they're still this young, they have a little trouble getting fish.
He can move fast when he wants to.
Yes, very powerful. Right. They're usually no problem unless you press them too much and they don't feel they have an avenue of escape. When they think that there's a way out for them, they'll rather go that way than through you.
I'd rather they did too.
The terminus of the Mendenhall Glacier on the outskirts of Juneau is one of Alaska's unique, impressive, and most easily approached visual wonders. The Mendenhall, together with a number of other gargantuan rivers of ice, comprise the 1,500 square mile Juneau ice field. The glacier is one of the Earth's most delicate recorders of climatic change, and thus do students and scientists come here to analyze its past, present, and future. This ice field in particular, due to its intense storms and exceptional snowfall, is perhaps the most climatologically sensitive in the world. Professor Maynard Miller of Michigan State established this summer program 6 years ago. His own research in the area, partly supported by the National Geographic, has covered a span of more than 20 years.
Now, I frankly don't care whether this is a one-page report or one single equation, but it must be something that reflects the increase in your ability to observe and to learn from nature. Something that isn't in a textbook, something that isn't in the libraries. In so doing, you will get into a deeper dimension of all knowledge which is derived from basic research. Now, the ice field is a vast one. It is an incredibly beautiful landscape. When the weather is clear, I hope you'll take a little time to enjoy that type of thing, as well as some of the new knowledge that you gain, because then this will be reality for you.
Sometimes over 100 feet of snow falls here annually. The succeeding year's deposits compress it to a fraction of that depth. And as the scientist descends a crevasse, he may read a record of the glacier's life in the delineated layers of ice. With other research results, he may determine not only how fast it is moving, but how far. Glaciologists call this period the Little Ice Age. Dr. Miller suspects another great one is in the offing. Shirt-sleeve weather has favored Bill's brief visit. Before the summer is out, blizzards will pound this camp for days on end.
All of the beauty here is only beauty in the minds and in the souls of men. Man somehow tends to ignore this. Man is a creature of the glacial, fluvial age. These students learn that they are creatures of the land, that this country controls them. They do not control it.
What is said of Alaska's glacier-covered country, it controls man, should also apply to its ostensibly lush terrain. Homesteads are free for the asking on 300 million acres of public lands, but even the government regards them mostly unsuitable for cultivation. Yet it is the nature of Alaskans not to accept the conclusions of others. Bob Watkins was born in Kentucky and worked as a mechanic in Detroit before coming north in '59. Having met the requirement for ownership, 20 acres cleared and tilled within 5 years, this 160-acre homestead is now his. Starting this year, Bob and his family of 5 plan to live here permanently. While the odds are against them, the government estimates 2/3 of all homesteads will fail. They believe their few head of cattle and small crops of peas, oats, and barley will eventually grow to commercial size and provide them with a comfortable income. In the meantime, they will live off their own land.
Bob, what do you consider a homesteader to be up here? Got that one?
Well, I think you got to be a little bit nuts to start in with.
Feel isolated up here?
No, I don't feel isolated. Sometimes I feel like the rest of the world is. That, in case of emergency, you can get out here pretty short notice.
What made you come up here in the first place? What bothered you most about Detroit? And,
I think the worst thing that bothered me there was get on one of them freeways and have to stop, and then you start up and you drive another 10 feet, stop, start up again. Lots of road, but you couldn't go anywhere.
You don't have much traffic out here, do you?
No, we're not bothered with many traffic congestions. The kids really like it real well. The wife, I guess, would rather be in the city, but this is where our home is.
Are you satisfied?
Yes, I certainly am. I wouldn't take $1 million for it, and I wouldn't give $100 for another one like it.
A century ago, the press, public, and many congressmen thought $7,200,000 an absurd price to pay for all of Russian America. Secretary of State William Seward tolerated many frustrations and much name-calling before achieving his truly foresighted goal. At 4 a.m. on March 30th, 1867, hours before Congress was to adjourn for the year, the treaty was signed with the Tsar's representative, and Wall-Russia, as its detractors called it, became a United States possession. Father Gerasim Schmaltz, 78, left Russia in 1914 and has ministered to the Alaskan Indians ever since. While the Russian Orthodox faith still guides some 10,000 natives, it is the last fading vestige of the Tsar's culture in Alaska.
Christos воскресе, Christ is risen. God bless everybody.
The natives' own culture, long dormant and in some cases totally forgotten for many decades, has been gradually finding its way back as an integral part of tribal life. For the Eskimo in the north, as for the Tlingit in the south, tourism has been a prime factor in this cultural renaissance. Considered by many outsiders as an unworthy, superficial basis for reviving traditions, the economic incentive has in fact led these people to other significant rewards: a prideful understanding of their past and a sense of self-identity. The Athabasca Indians of Tyonek, an isolated fishing village on the Cook Inlet, have lived a long time without a cultural heritage, and like most of Alaska's native population, without decent housing and medical attention as well. The tribe's leader, Albert Kaloa, recalls a poverty-stricken childhood, during which there appeared no hope for a better future. Then, in 1962, oil companies came to Tyonek.
New homes, 60 of them, were the first order of the day when the village received $12 million for options on some of its land. Although millions more in royalties are expected after production begins, the fortune is regarded as communal rather than personal property. The men are to continue earning their own livings. While many are learning new trades from construction to oil rigging, Al prefers to stick to his old one, commercial salmon fishing. The foremost fisherman in Tyonek, he's usually been able to make enough in the month-long season to support his family through the year. Many of his fellow villagers, however, are seldom as successful. This summer, the village inaugurated its own Head Start program. Al pointed out how since their sudden prosperity, he could see a change in the people. Kids smiled now, and many of the grown-ups had put on 20 pounds. Education is perhaps their most vital concern. College had always been an unthinkable luxury. No longer.
We're helping the Indians from up north.
A new public school is scheduled to open soon. But the 270 Tyonics aren't stopping here. They pledged themselves and their capital to helping all the native peoples of Alaska achieve a similar high standard of living and degree of independence.
We used our money to further the native people of Alaska.
All the native people?
All the native people of Alaska.
A month after my visit, the village received a terrible shock. Their young chief had died in a hotel fire in Anchorage. Al had lived to see hope replace despair. A quarter-mile of overcrowded shacks give way to a spacious, healthy community. Now a new leader must see to it that the way isn't lost, that the bigger dream to which Al was so deeply dedicated is someday realized.
The 1,500-mile-long Alaska Highway runs from Dawson Creek in Canada to Fairbanks, Alaska. Today's traveler, having taken the ferry up the southeast coast, need drive only part of it, about 3 days' worth. In 1942, 16,000 soldiers and civilians worked around the clock for 6 mud-filled, mosquito-ridden months to complete this epic task. The road has changed little. It is still mainly unpaved, dusty, and bumpy. The scenery also remains the same, uncluttered and magnificent. Between Fairbanks and Anchorage, there lies an area to which the men and women of these growing cities find themselves increasingly drawn. Mount McKinley National Park is their retreat, 3,000 square miles of unspoiled wilderness. Here, landscape and wildlife join together to form the special sense of freedom that to Alaskans is Alaska. Rising 20,320 feet, the lofty peak of Mount McKinley may be seen for hundreds of miles. Its siren call heard by mountaineers thousands distant. Their first challenge is to get to the mountain. Toward this end, the experienced glacier pilot is the key.
So, Bill, you could just say the mountain is like a mad woman. When the woman is wild, stay away from the women. When the mountain is wild, stay away from the mountain.
Don Sheldon is this wild man's name. Over the years, his daring aeronautical exploits in landing, retrieving, and often rescuing climbing parties have made him an institution in these parts. To top an already legendary career, he single-handedly built a hut with fireplace and all, a third the way up McKinley's south slope. He'd like to see a ski tow here someday, and some profit. But this fantastic place is as deceptively calm as the Juneau ice field. The weather can sock in minutes, and you'd be stranded here for days. Between now and whenever he can make this a paying proposition, Sheldon seems content to share his mountain with people, like myself, I guess, who can get a thrill from just looking at a thing of beauty.
Anchorage is an hour's flight from McKinley. On a summer afternoon, it glows with the self-confidence of a prospering community. Yet here also have Alaskans been made aware of the suddenness with which a storm may dispel the calm. The sights and sounds of the Good Friday earthquake of 1964 are still etched in every Alaskan's memory. The most catastrophic shock waves in North American history wreaked unparalleled disaster in a 500-mile-long arc. 115 people died. 4,500 were left homeless, and damage ran in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Anchorage's hardest-hit residential area, Turnagain, facing the Cook Inlet, had been the choicest location in the city.
The Lowell Thomas's house, like others in Turnagain, had been demolished in minutes and scattered across hundreds of yards. 2 of their neighbors' children were never found. Tay was at home with her boy and girl when she heard an ominous rumble. Only quick thinking saved their lives. She grabbed the children and rushed them barefoot into the snow, seconds before the earth opened up. The next day, I photographed Tay and Lowell as they salvaged the personal treasures of their world travels and counted their blessings.
I really don't enjoy coming down here at all. Even though the original disaster is kind of faded very much in memory, to come down and see all this clay and to see the trees the way they are, it just brings it all back very much. No, I don't think I will ever get over feeling fear at any kind of earthquake. I have to really work with myself to keep calm. Even the shaking of the house, maybe from a heavy truck going by or something, is enough to startle me.
Despite their devastating experience and the lingering dread of another major earthquake, the Thomases did not leave Anchorage.
There are tremendous opportunities for doing things here in the way of helping to build a community. In fact, there's just too much to do. I've just loved every moment here, and I wish we'd come a lot earlier.
Our last frontier, still undeveloped and untamed, welcomes with open arms all who would build a new society. The contemporary Alaskan, however, doesn't think of himself as a trailblazer, rather as an individual in search not of wealth, but self-respect and meaning. Not social status, but independence. And unlike the adventurers of old who came to plunder, then leave, he plans to stay. At present, the Alaskans' major source of income is from government spending. By 1970, however, oil companies will have invested $1 billion in anticipation of a long-term industry, and hopes are high that the liquid gold will give the state a self-sustaining economy. In the meanwhile, Alaska's infinitely varied landscape and stunning wild creatures are each year attracting more tourists to the remote northern shores. The noise and polluted air of the big cities, the frustrations in finding an uncrowded retreat, are evils yet unknown in Alaska. Will the prophecy of social and political greatness ever become a reality for this country? Or has it not perhaps become an irrelevant question? Here where one may gaze in wonder on a summer sun at midnight.
In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god.
In Search of Man was presented by 3M Company, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, a worldwide company with a world of new ideas for you.